Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Come On In. I'm Emma from Small Business Britain, and today we have Brian Chappell with us here today. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Emma. Good to be with you today.
And Brian is going to talk to us about how you can protect your small business from cyber threats in this ever-changing world of AI, which I know we all feel is totally taking over. So we are recording today. So if you miss out on anything, don't worry. We'll be sharing the replay to your inbox so you can catch up on anything that you've missed or anything you want to kind of go back over. That's absolutely fine. Do get involved in the chat and say hello. And if you have any questions, we do ask that you pop them in the chat box, the Q&A box, which is just to the left of the chat, because we'll be keeping an eye on those and answering a few questions as we go and some at the end. So just make sure that they're in there so they don't get missed. Finally, a massive thank you to BT Digital Skills for continuing to partner on us on these wonderful webinars. Without wasting any more time, I will hand over to you, Brian, and I will pop back in for some questions shortly.
Super. Thanks, Emma, and thanks everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedules today to come and listen to me. It's always a pleasure to work with Small Business Britain and give you some information which hopefully help keep you a little bit safer on the internet. I'm probably not going to be able to keep focused on the camera the whole way through, so please don't be distracted if I'm looking down. I could have turned on the AI capability to keep my eyes focused on you the whole time, but it looks really weird. We're going to go through a lot about AI today, what it is, what it isn't. We're going to talk about some of the cybersecurity issues around AI and some of the things that you can do to try and protect yourself in this ever more AI-dominated world. And I encourage you to look back over some of the other Small Business Britain webinars that have gone out. I've done a few, and some of those will give you some more information about protecting yourself on the internet generally, especially as we approach another Cyber Monday and Black Friday, when the opportunity to get drawn into schemes and scams is ever present. So let's get underway. So as has been said, I'm Brian Chappell. I work for a company called One Identity, where I lead their product management function. And One Identity is an identity management and cybersecurity company. We're primarily pointed at the enterprise, but I've been in the industry now for getting on towards 15 years in cybersecurity alone and 38 now in IT generally. And I've worked with businesses of all sizes in all kinds of verticals and different countries and cultures. So I've probably seen and done most things. I'm going to start with a little bit of what cybersecurity is, because, it's a very, very big topic and it's easy to get a little bit distracted and kind of diverted on what the details are. And I've kind of put up a couple of quotes here. One is very self-grandiosing in putting one up from me, but I think it's an important one. So Cisco systems, if you don't know them, pretty much a huge amount of the backbone, the infrastructure behind things like the internet and company networks are running on Cisco systems. They've been around for decades. They know what they're talking about, and they've looked at the problem and looking on the internet, many of the descriptions of cybersecurity take, as they did, this kind of enterprise view of what cybersecurity is about. So, as I'll read it out for those who may not be able to see it, the cybersecurity is the practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks. The goal of cybersecurity is reduce the risk of cyber attacks on devices, services, and personal information. Now, that's very true. That's what cybersecurity does. But I think sometimes it's important to focus on the why of cybersecurity. And because we're Small Business Britain here, I've taken the business view, but it kind of applies as an individual as well. It's really to provide a safe space in which you can do business or you can live your personal life. It's about making sure that, the information you encounter and the way you interact with things and, just your use of the internet, etc., is done in a safe way, because trying to think at every step of everything you do every day about what the potential cybersecurity implications are not great. And there are a lot of relatively simple things you can do, even as a sole trader, even as a part-time self-employed person. There's lots of stuff you can do to protect yourself, and I'll always talk about things like password managers to make sure you don't reuse password on the internet, and make sure that you have random long passwords that you don't have to type. These systems will enter them for you to keep you under control. If you've got firewalls on your routers or your computers, don't turn them off. Don't turn off Microsoft Defender if you're using Windows. If you're using anything else, don't turn off any of those cybersecurity controls. Those will come in some of the bits that come later. But really, cybersecurity is just about providing that safe space so you can actually get on with your life. And for me, that really brings home just how important cybersecurity is, and it stops it sounding like some huge techie thing. Now, I've been lambasted on the internet before for saying that cybersecurity is simple, and it is at the very base level. When you're looking at an individual threats, cybersecurity is relatively simple. When you get up to huge enterprises and you're trying to do that within the politics and the compliances and the regulations and the processes and procedures in that kind of environment, and the volumes you have to operate at, it can get very, very complicated. But hopefully, if you are an org of that type, or you're on the track to go to be that type, that's your target, you'll build the team along the way and get these things baked into what you do from the very beginning, because it's easier to start that way and build up than try to fit it in later. So for those who are looking to grow, that's my one absolute piece of advice, is get cybersecurity, or get security generally, baked in. It should be part of the fabric of your business, as I describe it. And it's really just a change in mindset from how do we do this and secure it, to how do we securely do it. We start with security, we don't end with it. So that's just something to give you in terms of cybersecurity. We're now going to talk a lot about artificial intelligence, what it is, what it isn't, some of the threats. Some of them are at a very high level, some of them company level, some of them are in terms of what it does to affect the cybersecurity. And I'll kind of give you some pointers as we move through that. So what is artificial intelligence? Now, I'm sure many of us saw the film AI some years ago. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. It's a great movie. It's not realistic, but it's a great movie. So we tend to think of robots, and iRobot, the movie with Will Smith, had similar looking robots in it, and these things generating or becoming self-aware, etc. That's actually the bottom of these four categories here, which is general artificial intelligence. And that's really that scenario where something does become self-aware, or it's an intelligence which is not assigned to any particular task. We would consider ourselves to be general intelligences, in that we can apply ourselves in many, many different ways. The truth of artificial intelligence today, or what is often mistaken as artificial intelligence, which is called machine learning, and there are many ways in which I can say that AI is actually a machine learning thing, which is actually really just maths at the end of the day, but it's how they perceive, or they're perceived by us. So the very base category here, machine learning, is about programs that can learn and evolve, but within very specific constraints. I suspect there's not many people on here who have not looked at things like Amazon. But when Amazon recommends products to you, there's a machine learning algorithm running in the background that is making assessments based on what other people have looked at, what other people have gone on to buy, what you've bought, bringing all of that data together. And this is the first stage where it really brings home what AI is about, or machine learning is about. It's about being able to look across masses of data and draw conclusions from it, or see patterns in it. And at the end of the day, that's pretty much all of these things do. They're just looking at huge amounts of data. And this is where it's kind of helpful for us as people, because in our lives today, we have to deal with more and more data than our predecessors ever did. There's so much information we have coming at us. So machine learning is a really good tool to help, make sense of some of that data and provide us with some guidance moving forwards. There are lots of other machine learning techniques. A lot of the things that you might see in terms of image replacements or sound changes or the colorization of the movie that the Weta team did, the World War I documentary, where they actually colorized that. That's all machine learning, where it was able to learn that certain levels of gray should be a certain color and do all those kind of balances and understand many of the things that are going on. Predictive AI is something we use in business at enterprise level, certainly. And those are things that can look across the data and try and forecast what's going to happen next. So, I'm sure it's being used in stock exchanges around the world as they try and predict where stock prices are going next. But it could be as simple as saying, hey, through the first half of this year, we sold a lot of these things and these things. Is that likely to continue for the rest of the year? And so, this predictive side of things helps us just look at the data again, and where it would be hard for an individual to look across the sheer volume of data and draw any conclusions, the AI is able to deal with that kind of volume of data and give us some insights. Something you'll hear throughout this is we don't just take those insights and act on them. We'll go and we'll verify them against our own analysis and our own assumptions, and we'll do our own reviews of some of the data to make sure that the AI is actually pointing us in the right direction. And validation of the outputs of so many things is so important, and also covered in other webinars that we've done. The most common one we talk about today when we think about AI is generative AI. ChatGPT, Bing, I think Galileo in Google has just appeared. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of generative AI systems that are out there. They do things like you're able to ask it questions, or able to answer to summarize documents, or create images. It's incredible what these things can do, and they seem almost like they're self-aware. They may even seem like they're self-aware, but they're absolutely not. And we'll kind of come into some of the things that are going on in the background so that you can feel a little bit more comfortable about using these systems where appropriate. So we'll get into the cybersecurity side of things. And in cybersecurity, I really kind of include anything that relates to digital information. Because with the best will in the world, you may be a company who makes something in the best way possible. You will be a company who delivers a service in the best way possible. How you do that is information you have, and that's the information that is most valuable about your organization. Protecting your information is increasingly important. So in many ways, we are all information companies in everything we do, even though we might not feel like we are, even insofar as just securing your email, or if you have a website or a web store, making sure those things are secure. It's all about the data at the end of the day. That's generally what the attackers are trying to get to you for. And they'll do one of three things. They'll steal it, they'll damage it, or they'll encrypt it. Sometimes they'll do a combination of those things, generally referred to in the cybersecurity space as the impact. Now, I will tell you that the image on the screen was generated by AI. I use a tool called Adobe Firefly, and I gave it a description. I said, I want a picture of a hacker looking from the back. They're looking at their screen with a modern robot looking over their shoulder, providing them some help. And this is one of the images that the Firefly produced. It produces 4 at a time, so you can pick through them and you can iterate as well. It's really cool. Go and play with it. It's a lot of fun. But to give you some little pointers straight away on things that probably you might not notice in terms of the image, over on the right-hand side of the monitor, you'll notice it's not actually straight. It's not continuous. If you look at the keyboard, the keys are oddly shaped, and the right hand of the hacker, while typing, also appears to be holding a mouse. And the right arm of the robot also not quite properly formed. AI generation of images, to get them to high fidelity, is incredibly expensive and incredibly difficult. This is the reality of the majority of the generated information that AIs produce. So little things to look out for when you're looking at images and information. But let's get to the AI risks themselves. And there's a whole heap of them here. You know, copyright issues are something that concern a lot of businesses. My business, we've gone through these kind of things. Misinformation we see generally out there in the space, and deepfakes, obviously one of the big areas that we see a lot of news coverage about over the past 3 or 4 years. There's a few in there that might not make immediate sense to you, but we're going to dig into each one in just a little bit more detail as we progress. So I'm going to start with data leakage and copyright issues, because they're kind of the same thing, just from different directions. So if I went to something like ChatGPT and I asked it to, say, produce the script for this presentation, it may actually do a really good job at it and give me really lots of great information. But in producing that information, we have to understand some of how it can do that in the first place. So ChatGPT, Bing is built on top of the same technology from OpenAI. Google have their own technologies. There are many, many what are called large language models out there. So a model is what AI is working on. That's how it interprets input data to output data. It just has a model. You can think of even like an addition symbol as being a model in maths. You have 2 input values. The model is to add them together, and the output is the result. That's pretty much, at a very basic level, some of what's going on inside these things. But at levels of parallelism that are hard to comprehend. But the large language piece is the giveaway for what these generative AIs are doing. They have been trained on millions, billions, possibly even trillions of documents. And it has scanned every one of those documents. It's analyzed the text, it's broken it down into little pieces, and it's worked out a model that tells it how to predict what the next word fragment will be. And let's keep it at a bit higher level, and so what the next word would be in a sentence and what punctuation might follow it. And that's literally what it does. When you ask it a question, it takes that question and it tokenizes it into its system, and it says, okay, based on that question, what will be the next word that comes after that, and then the word after that, and then the word after that. And this is pretty much all it's doing. And again, this is very high level. There's lots and lots of clever stuff going on, and it goes through multiple iterations of this in the background. And often some of these models will be operating on billions upon billions of input parameters at any time. So it is got that's how it gets the ability to produce this text, which seems like it's being written by a person. But because it is a statistical activity, it is potentially possible that if you ask the right question, it could reproduce a piece of text it was trained on in its entirety. There's a kind of a similar kind of thought experiment that's been around for many, many years, which is often referred to as the infinite monkey problem. Sometimes incorrectly as referred to as, if you give an infinite number of monkeys typewriters and they bang away on the keys, then logically at some point, statistic tells us, they will produce the complete works of Shakespeare. Truth is, it's actually one monkey with a typewriter and an infinite amount of time. The monkey should, in some way, produce the complete works of Shakespeare. And generative AIs are a little bit like that, except they're not just banging away at the keyboard. They're looking at each key they press and thinking about what the next logical key would be to output. But it could be something that reproduces in its entirety something somebody else wrote. And then there are questions about who owns that output. Because the AI knew about it. So if we talk about copyright in other areas, if you produced a product that was exactly the same as somebody else and you'd seen that product, they could argue that you had copied it. So it becomes a concern. Who owns the output from these things? There's also the fact that many of these tools will learn from what you're typing into them. And in that regard, if you gave it information about your company finances and asked it to summarize them or see if there are any patterns or draw conclusions from it, there's a very, very, very small possibility that it could regurgitate your financials to somebody else who asks the right questions. It's incredibly, incredibly unlikely. I cannot stress that enough, but there is a risk there. And when we get into the legal space, there is a real concern that, with risk generally, and companies would like to protect themselves against those types of things. So generally, when dealing with generative AIs, I would say, and a lot of generals in there, that you should always be cautious about what you're putting into it, and anything that comes out of it, always just take that as a guide and use it as the starting point, not the ending point for what you're doing. Unless you're using a tool like if you've got LinkedIn and it's rewording your profile, or you've got one of those tools for sending marketing emails and that has something built into it, just make sure that there is indemnity in there for you in the use of that product in your agreement with that organization, so they indemnify you from any concerns there. So generative AI is an incredibly valuable and useful tool, and I would never say don't use it. I'd always just say, think about why you're using it, think about how you're using it, and always think that AI is there to help augment you. It's not about replacing what you do, and that's the same for anybody who works for you. Everyone got worried AI is going to take over their jobs. Chances are that's highly unlikely to happen anytime soon. One of the reasons why that's true is because, as I say, generative AI is just statistical prediction. It really has no concept in the same way we would in the meaning of the things it's producing. You could argue it does have meaning because it understands the links between the things it's producing, the words or letters or word fragments. It understands how likely those things are to be connected. But in reality, it doesn't understand the text. And that's an important thing to bear in mind. It is only learning patterns and relationships in huge amounts of data. I mean, ChatGPT, when it was first released to the public, which I think was the version 3 engine, that had been trained on the internet up to September 2021. And if you asked it a question about anything after 2021, no idea. Nowadays, they will actually go out and search the internet to give you a bit more information around newer things, and it will work that into the relationships and patterns it already understands. And as I said, every certainly text-based generative AI will have a thing at the bottom that says something along the lines of, this can sometimes be wrong. Others are a bit more prescriptive in that and may say, this is subject to errors and you should always check it. Again, it's a tool. It's something to help you. It's a bit like taking hearsay from somebody. It might be true, it might not be true. You have to do your own research and just make sure that you're verifying these things before you go and commit them to somebody else. And I asked Firefly here to produce as it says at the bottom, an abstract image that embodies the lack of contextual understanding in generative AI models. And this is one of the examples it came up with. And you could almost say that this is incredibly creative of it. It's produced this new piece of artwork, which I'm not sure if it really does embody a lack of context, although, you're breaking out the frame of what would normally be the painting. It's a very interesting image, but I'm almost certain that this has hung on to abstract image, understanding, and it's used generative AI there. It's ignored the AI and it's focused on generative. So it's more of an organic model. And you can begin to see, as you deal with these things more and more, the things that it's hanging on to and the things that it's actually discarding in what it's producing for you. So, but again, great fun playing with these tools. Our next image is not, as far as I'm aware, AI generated. This really, for me, just kind of really embodies the misinformation that we're being bombarded with on a day-to-day basis. It's actually in many ways becoming hard to know what to trust. From 2016, I think, was the first time we became aware of nation states using things like generative AI to produce materials that seem entirely convincing that are then shared on social media to try and influence things like elections. And that was in terms of the US presidential elections. And this time they're immensely concerned about how it could be used to influence people by giving them what seemed like entirely legitimate information, distributing that information widely. So if you search on the internet, you're going to find lots of instances of variations of that text as well, because it can do this, it can produce different variants on something. If you go onto something like ChatGPT and you ask it to produce you a paragraph, you can ask it to change the warmth or the coldness of the text, you can ask it to reorganize it, you can ask it to reframe the problem, and it will produce different versions of the same thing, keeping the same context. And that leads to reputational damage for the individuals behind who are being referenced. It's also this malicious influence on us in our environment. And it's used in many ways as well, and we'll come on in the next slide to some of the other ways in which those outputs are used to directly attack us. But where we're damaged by this, or where we're using information or reproducing information which is actually untrue, this can lead to damage in our customer confidence in us as individuals and us as businesses. And that can be devastating for some organizations in exactly the same way as being breached by a hacker in a cyber attack can be catastrophic for an organization. It's a while back now, but I think it was 2013, 2014 when Target got hacked in the US. In the first month after that, they saw a 56% drop in their turnover, not just their profits, in their turnover. It does impact your business directly when these things happen. So again, so vitally important, if you are producing something from generative AI, just verify the facts in it before you go forwards. There's an interesting story that I read about online, and I found it through a reputable source. And it was about a journalist who asked generative AI about a particular story he was working on. And he was reporting on not the National Rifle Association in the US, which is the largest gun ownership club in the US. It was the second largest. And there was apparently some issue in their executive team, and he was writing a story about it. And the II produced this article about a CFO at this organization, a chief financial officer, named them, produced court transcripts about discussions that had been had during cross-examination, etc., and presented that to him. Now, he immediately knew that this was actually entirely false. This is, daydreaming, or, I can't think of the exact term for it now, but generative AIs will sometimes go off on these dreamscapes and produce stuff that's entirely incorrect. The person referenced has never worked for this organization. He's not a CFO, and the court transcripts were entirely fictional. They did not exist in this context at all. But those were the next logical words to come out based on the initial question that was asked. And that kind of shows you the kind of scope of what can happen. Now, interestingly, the journalist wrote about this happening, and the individual concerned actually tried to sue the company who owned the generative AI for libel. Because obviously it was saying it was saying things about him that were not true. So a risk for the cybersecurity company or for the generative AI company, but interesting the way that can evolve at times. And the worst thing of all is sometimes these stories are picked up by legitimate news stories and propagated across the internet. And let's not even get into what happens when people pick it up and repost it on Facebook. Facebook is not a news source in any way, shape, or form, and anything you read on Facebook, I would always go and do some research yourself in terms of what that actually means, and whether or not it's true. It's very, very difficult at that point. And there are some interesting news sources coming up. There's one called Ground News, which I've used from time to time, which not only gives you information about the bias of the news articles, it also gives you details of everywhere that they've found this news story, so that you can make sure that it's giving you some good feedback. I am not sponsored by Ground News. I have no affiliation with them in any way, shape, or form. I just think it's a really cool way of trying to address some of those challenges today. Can't talk about AI without phishing and deepfakes, because the two things are linked. So hopefully most of you will have heard of phishing with a PH, which is when somebody sends you a message, often via email or via SMS, trying to convince you to do something. And it's generally sending them money is one of the key things that they're trying to fool you into doing. Now, we've had phishing for years in terms of the classic Nigerian prince or government official, or whatever country it ends up being, but they'll send you an email saying, oh, they've got this huge sum of money which they need to get out of the country, and would you help them by having it paid into your account? And at some point they're going to ask you for some money that's needed to free up the money because of some regulation or something. And these were often kind of laughed at because they had misspellings in them. They were often poorly formatted. We've seen that evolve into things from your bank or from your energy providers or from other services that you may well be using. I see a lot of courier delivery phishing emails around times like Cyber Monday and Black Friday, just trying to get you to click on something and often pay some money to release your urgent parcel, even though you don't remember ordering it. Again, often those were malformed in some way, shape, or form, but that was deliberate because they knew who their target audience was, and they were going for people who weren't paying attention to the details, because most of the people who were wouldn't fall for their scam. So they were actually really intelligent in what they're doing. They've moved on from there, and we see a lot of spear phishing. Now, just like, if we think of a fishing net, you cast it out and catch lots and lots of fish. In spearfishing, they're going for one target. So it's very, very specific, often to an individual. And, I know people who work in finance departments who've received SMSs saying, oh, it's the CEO, this has happened, this invoice hasn't been paid, I need you to do this right now, transfer $10,000 into this account. Really appreciate it. You're the only person I could get hold of. And sometimes that's actually happened and gone forwards because it's written the same tone as the CEO uses, because the CEO's written blog articles and been interviewed in the press, and things like generative AIs are able to catch the tone of an individual and reproduce text using that tone. Again, you can ask ChatGPT and other things to write articles with certain tones. It won't do it for individuals, but it will do it for certain tones. We now get faking of voices, so vishing or voice phishing is also another thing. So you could receive a phone call that sounds entirely like the voice of your CEO or your CFO, or even a family member that is asking you for money. There are lots and lots of ways in which they're coming at you now. And on the screen there are 3 images, which if I lift up my shirt here, it's going to scan for me here. So it does have my company logo here, which you'll see on these. That's quite clearly me. That's quite clearly my office. But this is a tool that does live deepfakes. So these are video captures from live video frames that I can stream out to something like Zoom and Teams. So I could even video call you as somebody else. And this reproduces those faces from one picture of the individual. So I have to say, obviously, as we look through these are all fake. And I have to apologize to Ryan Reynolds, Jason Statham, and one of my old bosses, Alan Sugar. Definitely not in those images, and these are deep fakes. So, video phishing, obviously not too far away at this stage, if not already happening. And the general advice I have for any of these phishing kind of things is always stop, take whatever route you have to get to the individual who's trying to contact you and verify that they send the message. Don't SMS them back, get on the phone if possible, so that you've got a better chance of being able to verify it's them. So just important things. And with deepfakes, as I said, with the other AI generated images, and ironically, the one in the background here is also an AI generated image, I'm told. Although to me, it looks like a perfect set of makeup, but there are a few telltales in that some of the circles are not very well done and they don't really appear to lay on the skin. But when you're watching deepfake videos, you will find things like halos of kind of just blurriness or fuzziness around the head, or if it's one of the videos where they've really just replaced what somebody's saying, so they're replacing their voice and changing their mouth to match it, you'll see them like talking and their chest is rising and falling as they're breathing, which obviously nobody does. So there are some things you can find, and surprisingly, AI itself is very, very good at spotting AI stuff. So there are tools that are coming to help us more and more in detecting these things. Malware creation is an interesting side effect. Malware is a big problem. And again, a lot of those phishing attacks will want to get you to a website where you click on a link and you download something like a malicious PDF or a application. Anything that seems too good to be true is almost certainly too good to be true. But we have protections. There are endpoint protection products out there, like antivirus, but actually much more sophisticated, that do anti-malware. Looking for things like Trojans, which are programs which are not what they appear to be. Viruses we all know about, and ransomware hopefully we all know about as well, which is incredibly risky in organizations. But they commonly rely on some kind of signature because it's really important they can recognize the tool or the product quickly. And so they produce very complicated signatures of the actual program files and use those to see whether or not it matches some known types. There's a big problem in IT in a way, in that there's a thing called the program execution problem, where you can never know whether a program will ever actually stop unless you run it and see what happens. So it's very hard for programs to, for these tools to properly predict what a piece of code is going to do. So what AI is very good at is kind of mixing up the malware, still having it do the same things, but mixing it up so that it looks different and doesn't match signatures. That just comes down to the fact of, if you've got a PDF you didn't accept, even if it says it's an urgent order and that it needs to be processed immediately, just think twice before you open it. Go back to who said they sent it to you and just see if you can verify they actually did. And if you get programs off the internet from anything other than the original producers of it, if it's not signed as well, if you can't see a digital signature on it, and you can normally right click and look at the properties and find information about the security of the executable, don't click on it. It's just about that extra, just pause before you leap in. Now, data poisoning sounds like an odd thing. It is something that really affects the AIs themselves. So obviously they're trained on data. So if the original data isn't great, it can lead to some problems. And in the early days of training many of these things, there were lots of biases, because there are biases in the text that's out on the internet. I refer often back to, I started my career in support, and for every person who called me to say or told me thank you very much for the help, there was 1,000 people who would tell me I was the worst person on the planet because I couldn't solve their problem, or they just didn't like the way something worked. So in my experience of the general public at that point, there was a definite bias in the data that I was receiving. But we see cultural and racial biases in images, in text. So that was an issue in the way these things were originally taught. These things are being addressed, and they're getting much, much better at finding and addressing that. But a lot of these things also go on to continue learning. And we've got examples here, like there was a Microsoft chatbot that went out on Twitter in 2016 called Tay. And within like 24 hours, the Twitter community had taught it how to swear. And Microsoft had to pull it offline because it will just learn. If it sees things repeat enough times, it thinks that's just the pattern and just assumes it. There was the DPD, DPD, the courier company, their AI chatbot started swearing, calling itself useless and criticizing the delivery firm itself, because that's the input it's getting from customers, because generally you're only contacting to say something's gone wrong. So again, they had to pull that. And, you know, there's a note there from Scientific American from an article also in early this year, saying that if they asked ChatGPT about being racially biased, and it said it was, you know, again, it doesn't really understand the context, but there is, as we get more dependent on AI and machine learning and the models behind it, we will find sophisticated attacks that try to manipulate the model behind the system to break it. So if I could send somehow fake ordering information into your sales order processing system, I might be able to make you then make assumptions about where your market was going, causing you to pre-order stock that you're never going to sell. So interesting ways in which these things can evolve. As I say on the slide, better protections are being built, but we've still got some way to go. So again, it's just about being cautious of what comes out of these things before we run off and start acting on them. What can we do in all of this stuff that's out there, that's coming at us? It probably feels a little bit overwhelming, and I definitely don't want that to be the feeling you go away with. At the end of the day, you know, remember that invariably, if somebody is a malicious actor, they want you to do something, and they want you to do it quickly, because they don't want anyone else to get involved who may be able to point out to you that this is not right, or it's not, doesn't look right. They just want to keep you in the world that they've built and take you through to an eventuality. If you've been watching things like Scam Busters on the BBC, or following any of the great guys out there, like you know, the Hack the Web and the rest of it out there on YouTube, there are some great guys out there who are combating these hackers all the time and going after them. But if you watch those things, invariably it follows the same pattern. They'll tell you that there's a problem, they'll tell you that they'll help you solve it, then they'll try and extract either some money from you in the process of doing that, or get you to install something on your machine, and they will want to keep you on the phone for that whole period. If you say, oh, I'm just going to call my bank and verify this, they'll go, no, no, I am the bank, and all this kind of thing. They're always trying to get you to move quickly. Even the vishing and phishing things, you know, you get the, oh my God, it's me, I'm stuck in a country, all of my credit cards have been stolen, can you send me some money urgently, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's all about trying to play on your emotions to get you respond quickly. So if you, any point you're feeling pressure to do something like that, double check it again, triple check it. This could well be a malicious attack. Cybersecurity controls that are built into operating systems do sometimes get turned off because they can seem irritating. Please, please don't ever do that. They are there for a purpose, and they do actually serve a good purpose. Windows these days has a pretty good layer in it that helps protect you. It does pop up and ask you things or prompt you for things at times. Don't turn those off. You are just making it easier for the attackers. I've said verify your sources. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're getting information, you're getting messages, you're getting calls, video or voice, verify the sources if anything about it just seems slightly odd. We have the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of the government. Go to their website if you haven't found it. There's lots of great advice on there, lots of information about upcoming threats in an entirely factual, non-sensationalized way. That's the information you want. That's the news you want about what's out there. Don't listen to the news outlets. Every one of them has an objective of getting you to look at their news, so they try to make it more sensational. There are local cyber resilience centres operated by the police. Another great resource that you can engage with, especially if you think you've been breached or you think you've had a problem, reach out. Even just calling the police is another good way if you think you've had a problem. Don't hesitate, get their advice. There are the non-urgent police lines that you can contact. Don't leave your social media accounts unlocked, particularly things like Facebook. If you're posting information out there, that is just gold for a hacker. If I'm trying to train a message to seem entirely legitimate to you, there's nothing better than your posts on Twitter, Facebook, even your pictures on the image websites as well. You can tell I don't use them a lot because I can never remember the names of them. And when you're using AI or machine learning, just be careful about it. It's nothing to be scared of. You just have to think about why you're using it and how you're using it. And I always analogize this, they're tools. It's just like using a hammer. If you're not careful using a hammer, as I have done many times, you're going to hit your finger and it's going to hurt. But if you're just that extra bit more diligent, the chances of you hurting yourself are actually much, much reduced. And if you do have staff, get yourself an AI and ML policy, even if it's just communicated verbally, but just make sure everybody understands the risks of using these things and just make sure that they're thinking logically about how they do it. So I've said a lot of negatives about AI here. I've sprinkled in a few positives, but I just want to revisit those. So again, another AI generated image. This one's a little bit cleaner than the others, but that image in the middle is a little bit blurry. It's a little non-specific. There are still some things in there that kind of pointed out as being artificial. For me, on the side of the robot's head, that circular piece, if that was done by an artist, that would be a dead circle. But you can see none of it is smooth. Anyway, AI augments you. Everyone's worried about it taking over your jobs. They say, it's highly unlikely that it's ever going to do that, because you need a general AI for many things there. It may make your job easier. It may remove some menial pieces of your job at some point, but the value will still be on what a human can do with that output, because there are things we do that it doesn't. And there's another thing you can do with the images. They all start from a noise picture. If you've ever seen computer generated clouds, where it's just gray, black and white spaces, these things start from that, which means that the balance of light and dark across the image is nearly always pretty even. So that's another good giveaway. If you have a tool that can look at the average color balance across there, or the brightness balance, and if you have a tool that can look at the red, green, and blue channels in the image, you'll find they're all almost identical. So just little things you can look at there. They help. They're great at summarizing long documents or books. They're good at producing boilerplate stuff that you can take on and just save you a lot of work. They're great at recommending stuff that you might like, even though you might want to turn that stuff off. And they're a lot of fun. Go play with them. So, I have this as a last word, and I'm pretty sure we'll send out the slides here, so I'm not going to read through this thing in its entirety. But I asked ChatGPT this morning, what are the biggest risks in cybersecurity with generative AI? And it really parroted back to me what I'd already put together in the slides themselves. And the image in the background is another AI generated image. And I said, generate an image that embodies the principles of generative AI, and this is what it produced. I am not going to draw any conclusions from that. I think there are a few brains flying around out there. Are certainly things that look vaguely like brains, but this is just what it came up with. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you. And in fact, I asked the AI to generate me a thank you closing page. And as you can see, it didn't do a very good job. There were some better ones. They did pick the worst, but it shows you it's not infallible in any way, shape, or form. And give you the opportunity for any last questions in the last few minutes we have here in the deck.
Oh, thank you so much, Brian. That was such an informative session, and especially so crazy about deepfakes and what you can easily create yourself, let alone what all these other people who have maybe more malicious intentions can make. So that was That was very interesting. Thank you so much. We have got a few questions, so I'll dive straight into those. The
Cool.
first question is, what sorts of things should be included in the AI ML policy, and should cybersecurity training for employees be mandatory?
Well, I think cybersecurity training for employees should always be mandatory anyway. I think in terms of AI and ML, that's more about policy, because there are so many variations and so many tools out there that you could be using, and things that are actually probably already buried in tools you might already be using that are AI and ML in some way, shape, or form. It's hard to kind of boil it down into something that's specific, but you will find cybersecurity training will increasingly include some aspect of AI or ML. And in terms of the usage policies for AI and ML, I think it is, you either get the situation where many companies are going blanket, you will not use it, and others are actually being a little bit more flexible. And really, it almost certainly is going to put the onus on the person using it to make sure that the information contained within it is valid, is correct, before they apply it in any scenario. And always, I would say, the restrictions about what you put out there is vitally important. Don't dump your company accounts into a generative AI, because even if the AI itself doesn't regurgitate it, which, as I say, is incredibly unlikely, that data could still exist in their infrastructure. And if they're breached, then your information is out there in a place you don't control. So it's just ensuring that the policy reflects that kind of general principle of being careful. There are plenty, again, boilerplate pieces that are out there now on the internet. If you have a legal team, they'll be able to find something for you. If you have a lawyer, they'll be able to help guide you as well to make sure it's proper legal advice. Everything I've given here is really my opinion, my experience. It is not in any way legal advice. And again, just like verifying the info from an AI, I would say anything I said you think about doing that isn't just general common sense, then please go and verify with somebody who can give you that full legal background.
Excellent. Thank you. There's a question which has just popped up in the chat, which says, is it okay to use ChatGPT in business to help generate work, but just to be careful or sensible not to copy it directly?
Yeah, I mean, I occasionally use ChatGPT and Bing. My company is a Microsoft Office or Microsoft M365 user, so we have access to our own private Bing instance. I sometimes use that to do research on the internet, but I'm going to use it to either verify what I'm thinking or understand already, or I'm going to use it as the foundation for what I then move on with. So asking ChatGPT questions is great. You might give it some text you've written and just ask it to check the grammar, or change the tone of the text because you've generated that in the first instance. I'd always be really cautious about asking it to write you a document for something, unless you're just again going to take that as a foundation and build on from there. But yeah, never copy and paste it straight into something else.
Great, thank you. Another question's come through. Says, thank you, Brian, for such useful information. What is your view on people storing passwords on browsers for ease of use?
Yeah, browser password stores are getting better and better. I am probably an old stick in the mud, to use a really old term, I would say. I personally use 1Password for my passwords because it's not just on my browser on my PC, it's on my browser it's in my browser on every machine I have. It's also available to the machine generally, and it's on my iPhone, and there are others out there like LastPass and Dashlane, two of the other leading products in that space. So just having that ability to use one thing in lots of places, and I even have things like credit card information in there, and keys for software licenses and stuff like that. So it's always available to me wherever I am. So browsers do appear on both of your devices. I use Firefox a lot on my desktop and on my phone, but still, I think that's not primarily what they're there for. I talked about hammers as, these things being tools and hammers being tools. And I always go back to the carpenter who arrives with the bag full of tools, rather than the 2 foot long Swiss Army knife that has everything on it. Every tool does one thing specially. And I'm a big fan of things being used for very specific purposes and just being really good at them. So those password managers are just there for that purpose. So I'd say they're definitely worth the investment. And with most of them, you can get like a family subscription, which is not going to break the bank. It's personal use, and most of them have corporate options as well.
Fabulous. You mentioned securing your email earlier in the presentation. Is two-factor authentication enough for this?
Two-factor authentication should be on every login that you have in every place. There are huge lists of known passwords every time a site gets breached, and there is a site called Have I Been Pwned, and pwned is spelled P-W-N-D. I think there might be an E in there. I might be doing myself wrong. I'll add the link into the deck somewhere, so that you guys, when you get it, you can see it. But you can go there and check if your email address has been breached anywhere, and it will tell you all of the breaches that it's been included in. There are some that you can type in a password and it will go and check whether or not your password is in any lists. Unless you're using something that's creating them randomly, I guarantee they're in a list somewhere. Anyone who thinks they've been really clever and replaced letters with numbers or symbols, like using an at instead of an A or a 3 instead of an E, we know about that. It's been done for decades. Using passphrases helps you, but multi-factor authentication, or a second factor, will be the thing that will protect you, because that's the thing that can't easily be breached. Even if you're using something like Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, which just comes up with those 6 digits, that's still incredibly good. If you've got something like my camera here does Windows Hello, so I can use that to re-verify me, so biometrics is good as well. If you've got something that will do, and I'm going to use a tech term here, FIDO2 or something like that, which is even more secure for your authentication. You can go with a single factor where it's one of those other things, but if you're using a password, always multi-factor, and I'd always recommend at least 2 factors. So a factor being a method of authenticating yourself. I'd always recommend 2 or more in every scenario.
Yes, thank you. This is a very good question, this one. What role does data privacy play when using AI tools? How can I make sure that I'm compliant with regulations like GDPR?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, and I am going to give the legal caveat again, that this is not legal advice. I mean, GDPR is about protecting the data of the individual, and that's often a bit blurred in the world. It's about personally identifiable information, and I will tell you, I did read all 206 pages of the GDPR legislation when it first came out, and I've written many white papers about it. But I'm not an expert even within that. But it is about protecting individual information. So if you are putting anything into a generative AI, as I've kind of already said, probably don't. If it is personally identifiable information, then please think twice in that scenario. If it's a necessity for you, take legal advice on that. If you are looking up information about individuals using a generative AI, then I would be very careful about what comes back out of that, because if you publish it and it's not true, you could be in trouble for that as well. So in terms of other AI tools, if it's a machine learning process, so moving away from the generative AI, if it's just something that runs inside your organization and is using PII data for evaluations, etc., then those are generally somewhat acceptable, but you have to be careful about how you use the outcomes from it. And in general terms, and I did just say there, in evaluations, not evaluating individuals. You shouldn't be using these tools to profile individuals in reality, certainly in my opinion. But again, if you're concerned, I would take professional legal advice in that space.
Absolutely. Excellent. Oh, thank you so much, Brian. We have come to the hour now, so I will let everybody go. But thank you to everyone for joining and for being so engaged in the chat and the Q&A. Thank you to BT again for making this webinar possible. Keep an eye on your inbox. We will be sending you a replay, and we hope to see you all really soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.